The Philadelphia 76ers are officially on their last legs to win a championship. Now, I know this may sound odd to a lot of people, especially when they had the offseason that they had and getting Paul George being the major signing. But this team is at its wits' end. Right now, there's a lot of factors that are at play, and it has really nothing to do with the talent per se, but more so with a bunch of other things that I'll get on later in this video. Now, when you talk about the East, you have to talk about basically one team, and that is the Boston Celtics. Are you good enough to beat the Boston Celtics in a 7-game series? And if we're not even close to beating them, if we're not a serious contender to beating that team, then we're kind of wasting our time here. But the 76ers has actually done something that I think is probably the best thing that they've done in a long time. And that is actually seriously contend for a championship by actually picking up great pieces and keeping role players that deserve to be on this team and that are great contributors to the team. Now, the biggest thing that is great for the 76ers is the fact that they made great pickups in the offseason. And they were literally franchise changing. They got Paul George. I know Paul George is going to be the one that breaks the headlines. But you getting Reggie Jackson, Andre Drummond, and keeping Caleb Martin, that is going to just bode well for your team. That is just straight up great decision making from the top brass, making sure that they get one. Paul George, a person who is, great for his position, who can play on ball and off ball. Reggie Jackson is a great role player in himself. Andre Drummond is a great big coming off the bench, and Caleb Martin, when healthy, is a really streaky player that can kind of get you a lot of good runs when the stars are on the bench, and you don't want to give up that lead, or actually you want to put a dent in the lead. And so they made some great additions to the roster. Following that, they also kept two good players who not many people really care about, but that's Kelly Oubre and Robert Covington. I mean, these players are great. They are true role players that doesn't do anything that is above or below what they're asked for. They do exactly what they're asked for and nothing above or below it. It is simply great role players. And that's really what you need. If you're following this channel for a while now, you always hear me say that, star players are great for whenever you want to make a lead, for whenever you want to keep a ship afloat. But it's the role players that pretty much keeps the ship going when the star players aren't necessarily doing their best. Or even when the star players are doing their best, that you can't just win it with just two people. This is not like Houston Rockets where you have James Harden who can pretty much run the whole show by himself. And even with that, they would still be losing. And even with that, they would still be losing by a bunch if they didn't have the great role players that they had. And then you have Chris Paul add that in there. But, right now for the 76ers, they're just pretty much like in a great position to contend for a championship. Now, the biggest issue with this is that they don't have that much time left. And the time is really hinged on a few things. But the most major thing is Joel Embiid and his contract situation. Right now, he has one full guaranteed season left on the contract. And then in 2025 to 2026, he will actually have an option to opt out of his contract, a player option. Now, this is instrumental because even with all the players that I have mentioned before, do I believe that they can take Boston Celtics to a 7-game series? We will see. We'll go over the strengths and the weaknesses of that offense a little bit later. But this is a make or break because without Joel Embiid, this team doesn't work. This team doesn't even make sense. And so is he confident enough that within 2 to 3 years they can win a championship or at least get to the finals to justify him staying on the roster? Does he have the confidence in the top brass and in his teammates to do that? I don't know. Historically, for Joel Embiid, he's pretty much been a player that was marred with either injuries or just a lot of no-shows in the playoffs. And, many people will like that. Many people will say that, well, that's what he gets for, foul baiting a lot or frantically falling on teammates' legs like he did to Danny Green or, simply just trying to hurt people. But I think it also comes down to the fact that he was simply not ready for the moment. And we don't know when he will be ready for the moment because even when he had James Harden, his best shot to win against the Boston Celtics, granted he was hurt, James Harden got them 2 games. He got them 2 games, had 40 points, got them 2 games. Now, is he going to consistently get you, 40 points on every single night? No. But the issue was when Joel Embiid came back to the games, James Harden had to pretty much be passive mode. And that is kind of what happens when you play with Joel Embiid, especially if it's not integrated right. And so Joel Embiid holds heavy weight for this team, heavy weight for this offense, heavy weight for the defense as well. And will he or will he not take that player option and go somewhere else? Because every team, frankly, will need a player like Joel Embiid. I mean, the Golden State Warriors will be perfect with Joel Embiid. And he could take a pay cut, he could take whatever he wants. Because right now they don't have Klay Thompson on the books. Draymond Green is probably on the last legs of his contract, and he might take a pay cut if he really wants to stay with Golden State, or he might even retire. To be honest, I think he should, because it would be a great story tale for him to retire in a Golden State jersey. But there are many options that Joel Embiid can really take. He does not need to be in Philly for the majority of his career, especially when he had to deal with Ben Simmons. I mean, his career has not been necessarily great with the Philadelphia 76ers. And so that is the linchpin, the absolute linchpin. So these next 2 years are instrumental for him deciding whether or not to stay with the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, the great thing about these pickups is that really they don't need to have a strong offseason next season. They can just continue to build from the draft, which they have in their guard, Jared McCain, and then they still have Tyrese Maxey, who's a star in my opinion. But this team has a lot of strengths, and so let's get to that a little bit. Now, their biggest strength is that this is a pretty big team, a gigantic team, and not necessarily just in the fact that, like, if you were to compare it to the Minnesota Timberwolves, while the Timberwolves has had like pretty big bigs and, you know, decent guard and really good defenders on the perimeter, this team is really just tall and lengthy. And so you have a lot of big bigs, a lot of big wings, and even big, strong guards. You know, Tyrese Maxey is not necessarily tall, but he's a little bit strong, and he's shifty and fast enough to stay in front of his man. And then you have Kelly Oubre, who's also a tall guard, who is really good on defense. You know, the only real bad person on this team that really can't play defense is probably like Eric Gordon or even Kyle Lowry. But those people I don't think is going to be on the team for long. I mean, I think both of them are easily on their last legs of their career, Kyle Lowry being 38, Eric Gordon being 35. They're not going to be on the team for very long, if we're going to be honest. And so, you know, you have Reggie Jackson, who's also a really good defender, and then your wings, your forwards, and they're just simply great. I know I'm big on Robert Covington. I think Robert Covington is a great pickup. And then you have Paul George, who's really good on defense, even though sometimes he doesn't try, and that is also really infuriating when I see that. But, you know, you have those two, and then you have, you know, of course, the big men in Joel Embiid and then Andre Drummond. And so this team is kind of built for a lot of success when it comes to, you know, just being a great defending team. Now, the biggest issue that I see for this team, and this is something that Nick Nurse, listen, I give Nick Nurse a lot of props. He basically willed the Toronto Raptors with Kawhi Leonard, a one-star team, to a championship that is nothing short of amazing. But his stint with the 76ers have been a little bit strange, because at times you would want a lot more ball movement, and then there are other times where there are a lot of ball movement. And so it's kind of playing the balance of how do we play around Joel Embiid, because Joel Embiid is like a suction cup. He pulls in a lot of the defenders. He basically shrinks the floor, but their offense can be really formulaic, where you give Joel Embiid the ball, and then Joel Embiid makes plays off of double teams, or just simply makes a shot or foul baits. You know, those are like one of the three options where you can actually make it a little bit easier. Right now, you have Tyrese Maxey, who is great with playing off the ball, and then you also have Paul George, who also is great playing off the ball. Those two caliber players being able to make that sacrifice should allow Nick Nurse to have more confidence in actually putting more movement in the offense and having things kind of being circled around in a consistent cyclical motion around Joel Embiid, rather than a very stagnant, you know, get on the post, get on the block, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think that is something that, you know, a lot of coaches kind of struggle with when it comes to having a great big, is that you want the big to succeed, but you actually want the big to succeed within the flow and style of the offense that gives you winning basketball. The best example I can give you is Jokic. I mean, Jokic is simply amazing. But the one thing about Jokic is that not only that he can dominate, you know, 1 foot, 2 feet outside the rim, he can also dominate with floaters. And that's something that Joel Embiid really doesn't have. And so when Joel Embiid gets, you know, around 3 feet around the rim, he's not going to take a floater. He's most likely just going to go straight up. And so that's where the help comes in. That's where you do a 45 cut, you know, and you know, you kind of open up the offense a little bit more. Now, what happens is a lot of times Joel Embiid gets the ball ball, around the free throw line, around the elbow. And then that makes things a lot more dangerous because he can go downhill or he can just take his nice pull-up mid-range. There's a lot of intricacies within the offense. What I would like to see more is Joel Embiid setting a lot of picks, a lot of picks. And then also him being a Jokic-style playmaker where, he sets a pick, he puts pressure on his defender, and then forces other defenders to help and then dimes people up. He's not necessarily a great passer, and that's something that, his teammate Tyrese Maxey has worked on when James Harden left, is that, Tyrese Maxey has to really pick up the mantle of being the point guard for real for the first time. And so then Joel Embiid would literally be the point center, being the person that would basically make the whole environment of the offense work around him. Now, that is my wish list. I don't know if Nick Nurse will do that. It takes a lot of trust and faith that your players on your team that can do that. And I believe that they do. I believe that you have great role players. I believe that you have a lot of great teammates. You have a lot of people who can play with or without the ball. That is a definite plus. But at the end of the day, none of that even matters if they're not able to beat the Boston Celtics. And with Joel Embiid's contract nearing its end, or at least nearing the player option year, this whole experiment of having a mixture of veterans, having a mixture of younger players, might be all blown up with the departure of Joel Embiid.